He was born into silence. No lullabies. No warmth. No mother's breath resting gently against his cheek. Just the bitter sting of wire fencing and the echo of distant thunder. They called him orphan. A word that sounded too clean for something so broken. But inside the fragile ribs of that little lion cub, something still beat. A flicker, a whisper, a wilderness that refused to die. He didn't purr. He didn't play. He watched the world through eyes that had seen too much too soon. Until one day, a touch came that didn't hurt. A voice that didn't command. A human who didn't walk away. And from that moment on, Thor began to want something. Not food. Not freedom. But something even more dangerous for a cub like him. Love. And love, as he would learn, asks you to stay. Even when something always breaks, before we start. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment. Because these aren't just animal stories. They're stories of survival, love, and the quiet moments that change everything. If you believe wild lives matter, hit subscribe now. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next soul-stirring journey. Now, let's begin. The sun had no warmth in this place. It rose like an obligation, low, pale, and stripped of color, spilling only dull light across the jagged fence lines of the abandoned wildlife compound in northern Cordala. No birds sang near the gates. No rustling leaves. Just the constant hum of insects and the distant cough of diesel engines from the nearby industrial highway. Inside the compound, behind a rusted metal enclosure marked only with red spray paint and a half-peeled sticker that once read, Export Unit 4. A young lion cub lay curled in the farthest corner, eyes wide open. He wasn't sleeping. He never truly slept. His ears twitched at every footstep. His tail remained stiff against the cement floor. He had learned very early that the quieter things were, the worse they became. This cub had no name. The men who ran the facility didn't believe in names. They believed in weights, tags, and transaction numbers. For them, he was 547K, male. 8 months. Sedation tolerant. Borderline aggressive. Worth more alive than dead, for now. But aggression wasn't the right word. Fear lived beneath his skin like a second heart. He had seen what happened to the cub in the next cage when it growled too loud. The electric prod. The boot. The silence that followed. He had never growled again after that day. Not once. The place wasn't meant for the public. There were no tours. No school groups. No glossy pamphlets. It was a holding pen, off the grid and on the edge of legality, meant to process, package, and occasionally sell animals that didn't make headlines. The kind that slipped between laws and lived in the gray zones of politics and paperwork. And yet, beyond those barbed wire fences and dismal concrete walls, change was stirring. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Coalition had been working in secret for over 6 months, mapping the illegal facilities dotting the northern sector. A quiet order had come down from the top, Operation Silence. The goal wasn't spectacle. It was closure. Facility by facility, one by one, they'd shut them down. The compound where 547K lived was third on the list. And that's when Daniel Granger arrived. He didn't come with fanfare. No camera crews. No dramatic rescues. He showed up in a government-issued utility van with 3 field officers, a clipboard, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He was 38, lean and pale, with a week-old beard and shoulders that slouched like someone who carried more than gear. He had once been a research ecologist, specializing in large predators. But that was before the fire at Savo, before his younger brother was killed during a botched relocation. Since then, Daniel had become something else, not a rescuer, not a soldier. Just someone who refused to turn away. He didn't react when he saw the lion cub for the first time. Didn't step closer. Didn't speak. He simply stood outside the cage, hands in his pockets, as the other officers catalogued and sedated the nearby animals. The cub met his gaze briefly, long enough to register that this man was different. Not kinder. Not crueler. Just present. unmoving. In the following days, Daniel returned to the compound, alone, tasked with supervising the final relocation. But the lion cub was problematic. Every attempt to transport him ended in injury. The last handler had 3 stitches across his wrist. The sedation doses were getting riskier by the day. There was talk of putting him down quietly to avoid further complications. Daniel disagreed. He didn't file a report or argue with the board. He simply made space. Brought his lunch to the compound daily. Sat just outside the cub's enclosure and ate in silence. No gestures. No coaxing. No food offerings through the bars. Just presence. The lion didn't trust him, of course. Not at first. On day 3, he bared his teeth when Daniel came too close to the fence. On day 5, he charged the corner briefly. But on day 7, he did nothing. And that was progress. Daniel had a way of disappearing into the background. He sketched maps, read field notes, repaired harnesses, all within the cub's line of sight, but never intruding. It was a slow erosion of the wall between them, not a breakthrough, but a wearing down. One morning, a young intern named Leah tried to speed things up. She brought a wool blanket, soft and blue, and gently slid it near the cub through a gap in the fence. The reaction was immediate. The cub didn't just flinch. He exploded, body surging against the enclosure wall, claws scraping metal, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. Leah stumbled back in tears. "He hates us," she whispered, shaken. "No," Daniel replied quietly, never looking up. "He fears the moments that feel almost kind." The cub spent that entire day pacing. But that night, temperatures dropped sharply. An early cold front swept through the valley, biting into everything uncovered. The facility had long since stopped functioning, no heaters, no proper shelter. Just rusting walls and the faint warmth of huddled animals. Daniel came early the next morning and found the cub still lying in the far corner, but something was off. The usual alertness was gone. His chest rose unevenly. His eyes didn't track movement. There was a wetness around his nostrils, and when he tried to rise, his body trembled and collapsed again. Infection. Likely pneumonia. Maybe worse. The on-site vet wouldn't arrive for another 4 hours. The sanctuary medical unit was 60 kilometers away. So Daniel did the only thing he could. He stepped into the cage. No tranquilizer. No gloves. Just the blanket Leah had dropped earlier, folded now in his hands. Every instinct in him screamed to move slow, stay low, watch the paws, the ears, the eyes. But the cub barely lifted his head. He didn't lunge. Didn't growl. He simply lay there. And Daniel, with infinite caution, knelt beside him and laid the blanket gently over the cub's body. Still no reaction. Then, a flicker. The lion's head shifted. Slowly. And rested, just for a second, against Daniel's knee. It wasn't a cuddle. It wasn't love. It was exhaustion surrendering to something unfamiliar and not yet dangerous. Daniel didn't move for 10 full minutes. And in that silence, beneath rusted beams and broken light, a new kind of bond took root, not built on affection, not yet, but on something purer. Permission. Permission to be close. Permission to survive. And from that day on, the cub was no longer 547K. He was something else. Something unnamed. But watching. Always watching. He didn't call him Kilo right away. It came quietly, weeks later, long after the fever had passed and the lion cub, still thin and wary, had begun to rise again. He was walking now, slow and stiff like a creature still getting used to its own weight. But something had changed. The eyes. They weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. Daniel noticed it in the small ways first. How the cub would lift his head when Boots approached, not in fear, but in recognition. How he no longer pressed himself into corners when people came close. How he let Daniel refill his water bowl while standing just 6 feet away. Trust is never an explosion. It's an erosion. Of memory. Of instinct. of the old need to defend at all costs. And still, no one dared name him. Names meant permanence. Names meant responsibility. But one morning, while adjusting a trail camera along the edge of the transitional enclosure, Daniel said it aloud, almost to himself. Kilo. The sound of it settled strangely into the air. Measured. Clean. Like the click of something locking into place. The lion, half dozing in the shaded corner of his space, didn't react. But from that day forward, Daniel used the name quietly. When recording logs. When speaking to the few staff allowed near him. When writing updates for the rehab board. Never loud. Never forced. Just there. A wait. A word that meant, you exist. You're real. You matter. The facility had been shut down completely by then. The remaining animals had been relocated to various regional centers. But Kilo, still classified as behaviorally volatile, was transferred to a private off-grid sanctuary known only in internal reports as Station Hollow. It wasn't open to the public. It wasn't advertised. It was where they sent animals no one knew what to do with. The grounds were old farmland converted into protected forest corridors, with 3 observation zones and 5 holding units. The enclosures weren't cages in the traditional sense, they were vast open air spaces bounded by reinforced fencing and electrified boundaries. More space. More silence. Less fear. And for the first time in his life, Kilo could run. Not pace. Not circle. Run. Daniel saw it from the tower that first morning. How the lion took off in a jagged, confused sprint that ended with him tumbling into dry grass. He wasn't graceful. He was still rebuilding muscle. But the movement itself was sacred. And something else happened, too. Kilo began choosing to be near him. Not close, never within reach, but always within view. He'd follow Daniel's path along the fence. He'd wait near the gate when the daily rounds began. He'd sit just outside Daniel's cabin during meals, silent as dusk, listening to the scrape of utensils, the rattle of kettle lids, the rustle of maps. No begging. No demanding. Just presence. Daniel didn't reward the behavior. He didn't praise it. He just let it be. Because that's what trust requires: space. Not control. Not ownership. Space. But not everyone saw it the same way. The sanctuary board, now under pressure from new funders and environmental audits, wanted Kilo reclassified. He's no longer hostile, the report read. He exhibits signs of positive human association. Recommend transitioning to long-term resident with limited interaction privileges. In other words, keep him visible. Keep him part of the story. It was a move designed to satisfy donors, attract investment, and prove the sanctuary's success rate. Daniel disagreed. He's not a mascot, he said during the review call. He's a lion. We're here to rehabilitate, not romanticize. But his voice was a minority now. The sanctuary had grown beyond the mission Daniel once knew. New leadership, new language. More branding than biology. And Kilo, mysterious, camera-friendly, and hauntingly expressive, was their quiet gold mine. Videos had already surfaced online. Nothing invasive. Just clips from the observation towers. A lion sitting in the mist. A lion walking alongside a fink. While Daniel's shadow followed. A lion rolling once in dry leaves. People loved it. The idea of a creature once broken, now healing. It was irresistible. Daniel started locking his journal again. Kilo's behavior continued evolving. Not always linearly. Some days he'd retreat into old patterns, avoiding eye contact, recoiling from new staff, pacing in response to unfamiliar voices. But on others he displayed something near affection. Once Daniel fell asleep outside the enclosure, exhausted after a 14-hour storm containment drill. When he woke, Kilo was pressed against the fence, head low, breathing deep. Just watching him. No sound. No warning. Only the quiet nearness of something wild choosing not to be feared. Another time, while setting up a new enrichment puzzle, A meat cache buried beneath puzzle blocks. Kilo waited without agitation. And when Daniel walked away, he didn't rush the food. He walked toward where Daniel had been sitting. Saturday. And looked out into the trees. These weren't signs of tameness. These were signs of something deeper. A bond. Not the human kind. Not domestic. Something else. Recognition. Then came the storm. A violent wind shear tore through the northern corridor in the dead of night. Trees cracked. Power lines failed. And one section of the enclosure perimeter, weak from an old repair, collapsed. Kilo was gone by the time anyone noticed. No one slept that night. Drones were deployed. Trackers activated. Emergency protocols issued. But it was Daniel who found him. Not far. Less than a mile from the main compound, near the empty riverbed trail where Daniel used to walk in the mornings, Kilo stood. Soaked. Still. Not running. Not hiding. Just waiting. Daniel approached slowly. Kilo didn't move. And then, against every instinct, every regulation, every unwritten rule of separation, Daniel stepped forward and knelt. Rain dripped from the brim of his jacket. And Kilo stepped in. One heavy paw. Then another. Until his head, heavy and slick with rain, pressed gently into Daniel's shoulder. There were no cameras that night. No witnesses. Just the quiet collapse of a line that had once felt uncrossable. It lasted only a moment. Then Kilo stepped back. Daniel raised his hand, palm out. Kilo brushed it once with his nose. And walked back toward the compound, unescorted. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked. The next morning, the board arrived early. Not with concern. With opportunity. "This is what we've been waiting for," the new director said. "This is what people want to see. Real transformation." Daniel didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew. That moment in the rain wasn't the end of a story. It was the start of a new danger. Not the kind that comes with claws. But the kind that comes with eyes watching too closely. And turning wildness into content. For a while, it felt like they had found a rhythm. Kilo woke before sunrise. He would prowl the southern edge of the enclosure, watching the shadows move beneath the pines. Daniel would come with coffee, his notebook, a tin of tools tucked under one arm. He never called out. He never whistled. But Kilo was always there, waiting. He followed Daniel the way rivers follow canyons, never close enough to touch, but always tracing the shape of his presence. Sometimes Daniel talked while working. Quietly. Half to himself. Little nothings about broken trail cameras or warped enclosure gates. Kilo never answered. But he listened. That much was clear. Then there were the evenings. Kilo would lie beneath the oak near the observation tower, where Daniel read his reports under a rusting floodlight. Some nights, they were just silhouettes across from each other, silent, still, the kind of stillness that made people uneasy. But not Daniel. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't uneasy. He was tethered. And that scared him more than anything. It wasn't love. Not in the fairy tale way people wanted it to be. Kilo wasn't cuddly. He didn't purr or paw at the fence. He still flinched when startled. Still snarled when medical staff approached with sedatives. But he was aware. And willing. And that was everything. One afternoon, Daniel came to the gate late. He had taken a call from someone in the capital. A friend in wildlife affairs. Quietly, over a crackling line, she told him the sanctuary had been flagged. Not for abuse. For potential exploitation. "Nothing confirmed," she said. "But a certain clip is making the rounds. A lion pressing his head into a human shoulder. They think it could raise tourism appeal. Or worse, attract purchase offers from private reserves." Daniel's stomach dropped. He hadn't uploaded anything. But someone had. The storm night. The embrace. A distant tower camera, forgotten and angled wrong, had caught it. The video was silent. Low resolution. Shaky. But it didn't matter. The internet filled in the rest. "Lion who hated humans now craves their touch," read the headline. It went viral in under 48 hours. Within days, Daniel's inbox flooded, requests from news outlets, brands offering sponsorships, animal influencers wanting collaborations, tourists asking for viewing appointments. And amid it all, the sanctuary board went quiet. Too quiet. When the meeting was finally called, Daniel knew what was coming. He sat across from 5 faces, 3 of whom he didn't recognize. New donors. New interests. All smiling with that soft, polite urgency that comes before decisions are made without you. "We think Kilo has potential," said the new director, a man named Merrick, who had never stepped inside an enclosure in his life. "He's emotionally resonant. His story is compelling. He can help us expand educational outreach, partner with conservation groups, possibly serve as a non-releasable ambassador animal." Daniel stared at the table. "Kilo was never meant to be content," he said. "He was meant to heal, then return to the wild." Merrick nodded slowly. "And we admire your vision. But we also have to be realistic. He's imprinted. The public wants to see more of him. You've built something powerful." Daniel shook his head. "You're building a myth on the back of a wound." There was a pause. Then, "You're being transferred." It wasn't punishment. Not directly. Just a reassignment. A temporary deployment to a northern satellite reserve undergoing audit. 2 weeks, they said. Maybe less. Daniel packed that night. He didn't sleep. Kilo sensed the shift instantly. The next morning, he refused to eat. He paced more aggressively than he had in months. He ignored the junior handlers and scratched deep into the northeast post of the enclosure, where Daniel usually stood for head counts. Daniel approached for the final time just before dusk. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't believe in projecting human grief onto animals. But as he stood at the gate, he waited longer than usual. Let the silence stretch. Kilo sat down. Not near the fence. Farther back. Still watching. Always watching. Daniel left quietly. And in that silence, something began to unravel. Kilo stopped eating by day 3. Not completely. But sporadically. He refused enrichment puzzles. He ignored vocal commands. He began sleeping in a tight, rigid curl again, like the old days, before he'd known what it meant to be safe. The staff downplayed it. "Adjustment period," they said. "Happens sometimes after handler changes." But Kilo wasn't adjusting. He was waiting. Then, one night, a gate was left open. Not fully. Just ajar. A new volunteer, overworked and undertrained, had failed to secure the northeastern fence line after a storm check. It took less than 3 minutes for Kilo to find it. And he didn't run. He walked. Out of the enclosure. Past the empty watchtower. Across the southern gravel trail. And into the forest. No security alarms tripped. No perimeter patrols caught him. He vanished. Until the next morning, when a cyclist found him. Lying beside the river trail. Not hunting. Not hiding. Just lying there. Breathing. Tired. The cyclist backed away slowly and called the sanctuary hotline. By the time the team arrived, Kilo hadn't moved. He let them approach. Let them sedate him. There was no aggression. No fear. Only resignation. As though he had come not to flee, but to look for someone. They brought him back just before dusk. Daniel's flight had already been arranged for the following week. He'd fought for a reassignment cancellation and lost. But when the email arrived, Kilo breached. Found unharmed. Returned. Assessment pending. He knew this was the pivot. They would use this. Reinforce the myth. Lion misses humans so much he escapes to find him. The narrative wrote itself. And it made Daniel sick. He met with the vet privately. Asked for the full behavioral notes. The scans. The nutrition logs. The vet was honest. "He's not unstable," she said. But he's disoriented. He's not meant for captivity. Every time he starts to rebuild, we change the rules on him. No animal can survive that forever. The incident report framed it differently. Unusual behavioral attachment. Ongoing psychological dependency suspected. Recommend permanent captivity under structured public engagement model. Daniel didn't sleep that night. And neither did Kilo. He paced for hours. At 2:47 a.m., a motion sensor camera caught him sitting again beneath the floodlight, where Daniel used to sit reading. Head low. Tail still. Breathing steady. Waiting. The final break came quietly. Not with violence. Not with a roar. But with headlights. At 6:12 a.m., a delivery truck entered through the East Service Gate, late, unscheduled. The driver didn't slow down. And Kilo was there. At the curve where the trail met the service road. No one knows why. Maybe he thought Daniel had come back. Maybe he was just trying to find that cabin again, that voice again, that one safe shape in a world that kept changing shape around him. The driver never saw him in time. No one ever does. The call came just after sunrise. Daniel didn't answer at first. When he did, he only said 3 words. Is he gone? The silence on the line answered for him. The sound of nails driving into dry wood echoed across the canyon like a slow, bitter confession. Every strike was deliberate. Final. As if the act of building this new section of fence might undo what had already been torn apart. Jason worked in silence, his jaw clenched, arms raw with splinters. Across from him, the lion cub, now nearly grown, paced behind a wire mesh divider. His golden eyes, once soft with naive trust, now held something harder. Not anger. Not fear. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something that came after trust had been tested one too many times. Jason had named him Leo. Short, simple. Not majestic or wild. Just personal. It hadn't felt right to keep calling him the cub, once he'd learned how to nudge Jason's arm with his forehead when he wanted attention or curl beside the fire pit like a dog waiting for belly rubs. That name belonged to their good days. But now, Jason hadn't spoken it aloud in weeks. He hammered another nail into the beam and stepped back, staring at the crude wooden fence separating his cabin from the outer enclosure, the one Leo used to wander in freely, unbothered, even joyful. But not anymore. Since the incident with the hikers, things had changed. The headlines had been cruel. Man raises wild lion, disaster waiting to happen. Should wild animals be tamed? Tragedy narrowly averted. Jason had watched helplessly as strangers rewrote the story he'd lived. The hikers had ignored the posted signs, wandered too far, and startled Leo in the brush. The lion hadn't attacked. Hadn't so much as growled. But one of them had fallen backward trying to escape, twisted her ankle, screamed for help, and by the time authorities showed up, the story had already shifted. Fear had bloomed, and with it suspicion. They gave Jason a warning. One more incident, they said, and Leo would be removed. The word had echoed like a gunshot in his chest. Removed. Like Leo was a piece of faulty equipment. A risk to be managed. Jason knew what that meant. Relocation. Sedation. Possibly worse. He also knew Leo wouldn't survive in the wild. Not anymore. Not after years of bonding, of depending on a human's touch for comfort, for food, for safety. And yet either was he a pet. Not truly. Jason had never tried to make him one. Now the fence stood between them, not just of wood and wire, but of decisions made under pressure. Of silence. Of fear. And love twisted into something unrecognizable. That night, a storm brewed in the west, and though rain never reached them, the wind dragged dry leaves across the dusty yard like brittle whispers. Jason sat by the window, watching Leo curled near the far end of the enclosure. The lion didn't look back. 2 days passed. Then one morning, Jason found the gate ajar. His heart kicked into overdrive. For a moment, he feared the worst, an escape. Or worse, a confrontation with someone outside. He bolted into the yard, boots barely tied, calling softly. "Leo?" No answer. The stillness felt wrong. Then he saw it, near the edge of the pine grove. Leo wasn't gone. He was lying beneath the tree where they'd once rested together during long summer afternoons. His body was still, his side rising in slow, labored breaths. Jason crossed the yard, every step aching with dread. The lion was injured. A gash stretched across Leo's shoulder, deep and raw. Blood had matted into his fur. Jason knelt beside him, panic bubbling in his chest. How did this happen? There was no way to know. Maybe a wild animal. Maybe the fence had cut him when he tried to push through. Maybe he tried to run and remembered too late that freedom wasn't soft and safe. Jason placed a hand near the wound, but Leo winced and turned away. Even now, especially now, he didn't trust Jason to touch him. Jason sat back, fighting the sting behind his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you from me, too." He spent the next hour tending to the wound as best he could. No sedation, no vet. Leo wouldn't have allowed it. He cleaned the wound gently, wrapping it with cloth torn from his own shirt. He didn't cry, not really. But when he sat with Leo that night, back to the tree trunk, their shoulders barely brushing, he didn't move for hours. In the following days, the wound healed slowly. Leo didn't return to the inner yard, even when the gate was left open. He stayed near the tree line, watching. Jason began building a new kind of enclosure, one without walls. A perimeter of stones and logs, not to keep Leo in, but to show him where safety ended. Where the world might not understand what he was. And during those long days of rebuilding, Jason wrote. He wrote letters. Not to the authorities or the press. To Leo. He wrote about the first time they met. How Leo had growled so softly it almost sounded like a question. How the first time he let Jason touch him, it had felt like holding sunlight. How he remembered every scar, every twitch of the tail, every sigh that meant contentment. He tucked those letters in a box beside the tree where Leo slept now. Not for Leo to read, but so he would never forget the version of their story that mattered. The final confrontation came quietly. A ranger truck rolled in one afternoon, kicking up dust in the golden light. Jason met them at the edge of the property. They came to inspect, to see if Leo remained a threat. Whether the lion had been contained. But Leo didn't come close. He stayed under the pine trees, watching. Silent. Regal. Unreachable. And something in his posture, calm, poised, neither aggressive nor submissive, stopped the ranger mid-sentence. "He doesn't look dangerous," the younger one muttered. Jason nodded, saying nothing. After a brief, tense pause, they turned back toward their vehicle. One of them glanced back, as if wanting to say something but deciding not to. The truck rolled away. Jason exhaled for the first time in days. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the sky turned the color of old bruises, Leo finally approached the cabin again. He didn't enter. Didn't lay at Jason's feet. He sat near the porch, just out of reach, and watched him with eyes full of something deeper than memory. Jason sat across from him. They didn't speak. But in the stillness, something passed between them, an understanding. They weren't what they had been. But they weren't broken either. Just changed. And in that final frame, the camera would pull back, wide shot over the canyon, the fading light, the outline of a lion and a man, separated by distance but not disconnection. A soft voiceover, maybe, if this were a film. Some fences keep things out. Others keep things in. But the hardest are the ones we build between each other. Fade to black.